Welcome to Questions People Ask, the podcast where we discuss the questions that people ask. I'm here today with Julie Kennedy. She has an MPH, an MED. She's an RDN and an LDN. Julie did her undergraduate work at UNC Chapel Hill. She then achieved a master's in education from Georgia State University, and then a master's in public health and registered dietitian from UNC Chapel Hill. She is a Monash certified FODMAP dietitian. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
That's quite an educational background. Did you start out with a goal to become a registered dietitian?
So no, actually, before I was a dietitian, I was an 8th grade math teacher. I taught middle school in Georgia and got my undergrad here at Carolina first, and then taught 8th grade for 12 years. And in my 12th year, I got diagnosed with celiac disease. And then my daughter got diagnosed as well. And so I was asking my gastroenterologist, where do we go for help? Who are the people that help specifically with celiac? And she was like, I don't have anybody. And I was like, what do you mean you don't have anybody? This is a big deal, like taking something out of my diet and trying to navigate this and stay healthy. And she said, I don't have anybody to recommend for you. And I thought that was really not right. And so I started doing all this research, and I realized that I was like, fine, if there's nobody to do it, then I'll do it. And so I decided to go back to school, came back to Chapel Hill, went to Gilling School of Public Health. I had 3 kids. So I tried to do all of that at the same time, which was, a challenge. And then graduated in 2018 and started my nutrition counseling business, where I see patients that have been diagnosed with some sort of condition that requires an adjustment to their diet. And that can be IBS, it can be celiac, it can be Crohn's, it can be alpha-gal. But my job is to meet with people and get to know them and understand their eating patterns and eating habits, and how, with this new diagnosis, that we help treat their symptoms and help their symptoms improve, but then figure out just how to navigate life with this huge change. I have a practice in North Carolina. I am licensed to practice in North Carolina, Virginia, and Florida, but looking into Tennessee, licensing as well. And we take insurance. We are in network with Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, Aetna, United Healthcare. But the ultimate goal with all of my patients is to be on the least restrictive diet as possible, but to feel as good as possible.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
And you, as part of, obviously we've met before,
yes.
And as part of your education and training on the nutrition aspect, you spent some time in the UNC food allergy clinics, right?
Sure did. I got to shadow you, and the time that I was able to spend watching you do your job was, priceless, because first of all, I've never seen a doctor so compassionate and so willing to listen. I hear from my patients all the time, just wanting people to listen and to validate their story, and being able to do that, I thought was huge. And then to hear the patient stories was just incredible. Just being able to hear story after story and listen to struggles and try to find patterns within each story really helped me try to get a first initial understanding of alpha-gal. And then now being able to, help some of your patients with nutrition counseling. I've been able to learn so much from the patients. And then, of course, that leads to me doing more research and trying to figure out how to help and support and empower.
Seeing patients is part of the whole thing, because we learn, as you said, we learn from them. I feel like I constantly have things that come up that I hadn't thought about. And when all this started, we had no idea that carrageenan, for example, could potentially even be an issue. But you, I'm assuming, similar to me as an allergist, you can see adults and kiddos?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I have actually a dietitian that works with me, and she sees our pediatric patients. So she'll start as young as, babies, helping with getting the formula right and making sure there's, accurate growth and nutrition. I usually start with because I used to teach 8th grade, so I can do like the middle schoolers and higher, but she'll tend to do like the younger kids. So,
and there's a lot to unpack during these appointments with you, right? So it's not, it can't be a short visit, right?
No, definitely. Our initial appointment lasts about an hour, sometimes longer. We go through medical history. We talk about medications, supplements. We go through physical activity routine. And I do ask about the relationship with food. And basically what that means is, some of my patients love food. They call themselves foodies. They can't wait to eat. They get excited about food. And then on the way other end of the spectrum, I have people who are bothered by food. Like they feel like food is a burden to them. I had one patient tell me that if they could just take a pill instead of eat, they would. And, we all know we need to eat. So then there's like everybody in between. So when we get into that conversation, it helps me understand kind of what we're working with in terms of, is this person going to be willing to cook? Is this person going to be willing to try different foods? Is this person afraid? Because I have a lot of patients who have a history of disordered eating or even eating disorders where they've restricted for various reasons. And so we kind of have to navigate that. And then we go through diet history. I'll ask about, symptoms as well. And then at the end, we create a plan. And usually it's like an initial, what are we going to do now? And then as we follow up, it's all about, less restriction. How can we expand your diet? How can we work on diversity and variety, which is best for the microbiome? And then how can we help you get your quality of life back? Because that is usually a huge barrier. So it's a lot.
Are there specific resources that you tend to suggest to people, whether it's books or online?
Yeah, I will suggest the alpha-gal information. I think with alpha-gal specifically, I think support from peers is so crucial, but I also make sure to tread lightly there because there can be a lot of fear-mongering going on in some of these groups. And so we make sure to know that that can be a resource, but you also have to kind of use your own judgment there, whether it's helpful. I also recommend the Fig app. Have you heard about that? Yeah. So that helps. They even have subcategories of alpha-gal where you can check and filter your barcode scanning so that the label will say yes or no based on the filter that you've applied. And it will go like meat only, dairy and meat, carrageenan, like it goes that detailed.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you meet someone initially who perhaps is referred from me or others for alpha-gal syndrome, where do you start?
It's always important for me as a practitioner to meet the patient where they are. So I ask a lot of questions about like, what do you like to eat? Where do you grocery shop? Who cooks the food in your house? How many people are you cooking for? And then like, what do you think about food? What are some of your favorite foods? What do you like to eat? And then also, understanding their habits as well, because food is not just food. Food is emotional. Food is connection. Food is, power. It is fuel. And so trying to understand kind of where they are first. And then from that, I always think I know going to an appointment what we're going to talk about. And it's not right. I get surprised all the time.
I feel that way too.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, let's start this appointment because, somebody could also have a history with, cardiovascular disease, or they could also have celiac disease. You just never know what's going to happen. And so I first need to know what the situation is. And then, from that, after listening and validating, then we make a plan. And most often, not always, the plan involves some sort of data collection where we need to get an understanding of not just one day, but I need to know like 2 weeks. And it's not just food. It's also how are your symptoms corresponding to what you're eating. So I usually do like a Google sheet, like some kind of spreadsheet, because we need to keep it simple. where they just write what they ate, no measurements, no calories. Like we don't get into that yet. And then did you have bloating? Did you have dizziness? Did you have rash? Did you have numbing? Like how did your symptoms correspond to that? And then they bring that back the next time. And then we get into it. Like we literally share screen and we're like, okay, on this day you were bloated from that and you had that. And then a lot of times we'll then dig into the ingredients. Like what did these have in common that maybe have created that reaction? But the issue with alpha-gal is the reaction is so delayed.
Right.
And so there's time on there too and day. And then I think the other thing too is the cofactors that are involved in terms of exercise, alcohol, and the NSAIDs. So we talk about that too.
So it's very individualized.
Extremely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Certainly not a one size fits all.
No. And I think that I used to be a math teacher. So here's how you do the problem. It's this step 1, step 2, so I had to really adjust from my math teacher days to these are human beings.
Right.
And there's a lot more involved. And one of our columns is also stress level. We talk about how does stress impact our reactions and our responses to food and our GI if it's GI related. So that matters.
But even with all this and the levels of sensitivity, my assumption is that there is an amount of reassurance here.
Yes, definitely. I think that the biggest trend that I see is panic, sadness, because, you have to know, and I tell every patient, it is a loss. You have to acknowledge it and bring awareness to it. I have seen too, levels of grief, denial, this is crazy, I'm not doing this, and then mad, and then sad, and then I think I can do this, seeing that, over time it does get easier, but knowing that, acknowledging that response and not brushing it under the table when they're told, this big news, the initial shock can really be upsetting. And so saying, yes, this is hard, nobody's denying that. And a lot of times it's here's a piece of paper, good luck with this,
right.
See you later, and it's very hard to navigate on your own. So, giving that reassurance at the beginning is so important.
In your experience, is the alpha-gal syndrome diagnosis and avoidance diet different from what people experience, say, if they have been diagnosed with celiac disease or seafood allergy?
I mean, not that different. You're still being told there is this, and I think too, age matters because, my daughter was diagnosed with celiac at 8. She didn't remember what a real donut tastes like. I do, I know that this gluten-free donut is not good. And she's like, this is so good. And I'm like, girl, no, you have no idea. I think the older you are, the harder it is because you are so used to certain foods and certain ways of, navigating your life. I had a patient tell me that, every Saturday she went and had this cake with her dad at this bakery, and it was their time.
Wow.
And it was what they did, and they shared it. And she was just in tears. These are real, quality of life changes that, but it doesn't mean it's the end of the world either. You have to know you're not alone. There is support. You got to get the right people around you. And there is a path to eating and nourishing yourself because it feels hopeless in the beginning. But with the right help and with the right support and the right resources, you're going to be able to eat a ton of food,
Right.
But it's just getting there.
Yeah. And as a physician trained in sort of the allopathic approach, we're not taught or educated or mentored in any of that, really. I think occasionally some of us come to an understanding that food is really important, but that's not part of the typical medical school curriculum. So I don't think patients get that reassurance necessarily at the time of the allergy diagnosis.
Yeah. And it takes time, and it also takes a level of comfort. I make sure that my patients know they're in a safe place. I get it. I think a lot of my patients like that I have celiac. They're like, I like that you understand. I don't like that you have to have this situation, but that rapport is so important. And they feel like they're in a place where you can share with me, and I will listen to you, and then we'll find a path forward. This is not the end. We're trying to figure out how to move forward first.
And in that vein, are there things that people come to you, particularly after an alpha-gal allergy diagnosis, and they're concerned, nutritionally, that they can't, how are they going to meet X, Y, or Z?
Definitely, for sure. I think the biggest thing first is to zero in on the symptoms to see if we can manage that and treat that with food, whether we need to do meat, whether we need to do meat and dairy, and we go. And what we discovered when I was observing you is some people are as sensitive to the fumes. And so How do we do that? How do we see if we can get the symptoms under control? And then because trying to get someone to eat more and try different foods when they don't feel good is counterintuitive. I've got to help them feel good first and see if we can figure out how to reduce the symptoms and how severe we need to be. And then we talk about, okay, if you have to take meat out, what are the nutrients that we're looking at? We're looking at protein, we're looking at B12, we're looking at zinc, we're looking at iron, and then where are, other foods that are going to be safe foods that we can replenish and make sure that your body's getting, enough of those nutrients to help you feel good.
But that's not an initial immediate concern for you, right?
I don't start there because I feel like it's too kind of in the weeds.
Yeah.
Like I said, at first I get to know the person, and then and I do give them, some people want to know, what do I need to eat and how do I need to eat it? So I always have the packet, I have the whole thing, and here's a meal plan, and here's grocery lists, and here's some recipes, and I give them that, but we don't talk about it at first.
Gotcha.
We talk about it as it kind of comes up. I also emphasize the importance of vitamin and mineral testing to make sure that we understand what their iron levels are, their levels of B12, and working with their primary care physician to check those regularly, because a lot of times at annual physicals, those things aren't checked. And so you do have to advocate for that and say, I want vitamin D, B12, iron. I want those things checked during my appointment. Maybe even if they're out of range, you need to follow up in 3 months, to see what we're really working with before we say that there needs to be supplementation or anything like that. And we always try food first, obviously, but then, if that doesn't work, should we look into supplementation at all? I think the biggest thing is for people to listen to their body and pay attention to their symptoms, pay attention to level of fatigue, pay attention to any sort of rash, pay attention to, and their diet, a balanced, varied, diverse diet, and, looking at different vitamin and mineral rich foods. And if we focus on that and focus on the pattern of eating, then there is no need for supplementation, But with that, a large part of the diet is mammalian meat, and then meat products and dairy.
Yeah.
So trying to fill those holes, I think, is the challenge.
Do you sometimes have more worry or concern for the AGS patients nutritionally who struggle with dairy and react to it? And are those the people that we need to be a little more concerned about nutritionally?
If a person can keep dairy in, it's huge. You can get protein from dairy, you can get vitamin D, get so many nutrients from dairy. It's also a great convenience food. You can carry around a cheese stick with you and an apple, and that's a great, snack in the afternoon. So, and again, like I said in the beginning, the least restrictive diet that we can be on is the best plan. I always tell my patients that we're not going to avoid a food because it might be a problem. We're going to avoid a food because it is a problem. So we need to focus on, is there clinical presentation of this? Is there testing that shows this? Have I been told by my physician that I need to avoid that? But don't avoid something because, like the avoidance of dairy because dairy might be a problem one day, is not advised. Exactly.
Right.
The experience that alpha-gal patients have had typically is some episode that was, traumatic for them. And then not only that, but the time frame of misdiagnoses or not being diagnosed or not understanding what's happening, with that being reinforced over time. And the problem is that they are eating food like just a normal day, and then they're having this horrible reaction 3 hours later, and they cannot put it together. But then when it is put together, that food was the culprit of this painful, scary, traumatic event that they experienced, then the natural thing would be like, well, then I'll stop, like, I need to stop that food. But what happens sometimes, and what I'm seeing in my patients, is they're stopping lots of foods.
Right.
Because of the fear. And, understanding that association is, natural, and we understand that, but trying to reestablish that positive relationship with food and knowing that we don't need to be afraid is a lot of the work that I do, is getting and sharing the courage to eat again. That's really what I do.
Having the courage to eat again it's probably the heart of managing AGS and other food allergies.
And then the way that it kind of compounds, where they say, I had this event happen, so I'm not going to go to that restaurant. I'm not going to go to that restaurant, and I'm not going to go to that person's house. So I'm just going to stay home. And so it's about like creating a, plan that is logical and written down, and they know I'm going to check on them. Our next appointment, how did it go? Like, we go through our list, like, how are those beans? Yeah, I didn't try those. Okay, well, and then they'll say, well, I did have an apple, I did have some watermelon, I did have that, so, and then we celebrate that, and then we say, okay, what can we do to set up an environment to where you would be ready and willing to try whatever it is we're trying to try.
Do you have a sense, you mentioned that dairy can be important nutritionally, especially in AGS. So for people that have to remove dairy, one of the things that I hear, and I assume this is true for you too, is I hear a lot of this idea that there's not a great or tasty replacement for dairy or cow's milk or goat's milk based cheese.
Yeah.
Is that
It's true. And it doesn't melt. It's actually kind of gross sometimes.
Right.
Yeah. So, VioLife is one that I have heard about that people like. And I also think that, finding ways around, like, you can make a cheese sauce from cashews. You can blend up cashews and it turns into this great, like, nacho dipping sauce. Trader Joe's actually has like a taco seasoning vegan dip that is really good. You tip some Fritos in there and it tastes just like, the good old days.
Yeah.
So they're finding those substitutes, I think, is important, and being able to experiment and be willing to experiment. I think one of the frustrating parts, especially when I was first diagnosed with celiac, is I was looking for substitutions of everything that I used to have. And so I wanted, my mom's chocolate chip cake. And so we tried to make it gluten-free. It was terrible. And so we tried again and it was terrible. And I realized I needed to take a step back and focus on the foods that tasted like the way they were supposed to taste. Like, an apple tastes like an apple. Chicken tastes like chicken. Rice tastes like rice. And so I dug into keeping things as simple as possible. Making a meal that was chicken, broccoli, and rice.
Really whole foods.
Whole foods, basically.
Yeah.
And that not only is reassuring mentally and and it also is helpful physically, but it is honestly the way that all of us should be eating. And trying to focus on foods from the earth, because truly where all of the confusion and the label reading and the what is this is from processed foods.
Right.
So if in the beginning, the focus is on foods that are truly natural and whole, those are what we feed ourselves with and fuel ourselves with. We can kind of get back to a good place, and then we explore these products that, are fun or could potentially substitute something that I had before.
So in thinking about this idea of substitution or even fun, how do you approach like the red meat kind of alternatives that are out there? And I'm thinking about like ostrich or emu, and where does that fit in? Is it for everyone? How do you see people reacting to that?
Yeah, I think people get excited about it because you can make a pot roast, and some people love a good old pot roast. I think the barrier with emu and some of these other alternatives is they're expensive. So I think cost can be an issue. I think preparation can be frustrating because they're so lean.
Oh, challenge to cook.
So supplementing with like duck fat and like using duck fat to make the ground beef, or using duck fat in the crock pot, because you don't get that same like juicy, flavorful, taste that you get from, mammalian meat. And so finding that right supplementation in terms of how am I going to make this taste good? Because that's part of the disappointment is you're like, okay, I got this emu and I'm going to make this thing. And if it's like tough and terrible and doesn't have good flavor, then you're like, well, that was terrible. This is not what I was looking for. So finding, good recipes. I've got a few in that little packet that I give people, emu stew. But the nutritional quality of emu and some of the other alternatives is actually pretty great.
Yeah.
The protein level is very high. The fat is actually lower. So hence the leanness and perhaps, not as flavorful idea there. But from a nutrition perspective, they're great. So yeah, I would always promote that.
Is it, in hearing you talk through that, it makes me feel as though people who are good or better cooks have a leg up in AGS.
So yeah, that is kind of the reality is that cooking more at home is kind of going to be going out to eat, convenience foods, packaged foods is going to be more frustrating. So kind of leaning into, how can I cook more foods at home? But as I said before, the easiest way to start cooking is to roast some veggies, heat up some beans, bake some chicken, on a pan in the oven with some olive oil, garlic powder, salt and pepper, So
do you ever have to talk people through the basics of cooking?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, roasting vegetables is something that, can taste so good because it caramelizes the edge and, and air frying vegetables. That's something that a lot of people don't think about. We have air fried carrot sticks. We have air fried green beans. We air fry zucchini, squash, sweet potatoes, keeping the skin on for good fiber. But throwing a medley of veg into an air fryer with a little spray oil on there, like olive oil, avocado oil, it's just a wonderful side dish and something that can really supplement a meal and, fill up your plate to where you don't feel like you're starving.
I don't know that I have recommended cooking classes for patients, but it sounds like it may not be a bad thought in some instances.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I would 100% agree with that.
Do you have some sense of, for people that really have to be cautious about, say, gelatin or carrageenan, that there are common products that we might miss where these appear?
Definitely. I think some of the surprising places for patients are things like white sugar.
Really?
Like white.
This is real?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. They use bone char to refine the sugar.
Wow.
So things that have white sugar in them, beauty products, definitely, because they can have a skin reaction. Medications
right.
is a major frustration.
Yes.
surgeries, dental work, implants.
Mm.
But as far as food is concerned, it's going to be in the processed foods. It's going to be in the foods that are packaged and, understanding. But I mean, it's all dependent on level of reaction. So sadly, it turns into like a trial and error situation, which is not fun. I mean, it's a little bit scary, but like getting that initial, like, yes, I can have this. And then, tracking with your intake and your symptoms, every time I have this Lara bar, I have a reaction, and then you look into it usually. But those things don't usually happen until the reaction occurs.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's often how I approach it too, where I hate to have people remove things just out of an abundance of caution. But if you already have something in your diet and you're doing okay with it, even if it says natural flavors.
Right.
But if you have a snack in your diet that has natural flavors and you're doing okay with it, we wouldn't necessarily ask you to pull that out of an abundance of caution.
Right. And then if the reaction does happen, so many of what I heard in the patient stories with you was like the food was eaten, the lawn was mowed, it was hot, and then someone drank a beer, and then their terrible reaction happens. Right. And it's like, so do I really need to avoid the Lara bar, or was it that I had a glass of wine or two that made that reaction worse? So the preference is keep the Lara bar in and separate the Lara bar from the wine.
That's right. The cofactors make that part really a challenge.
Yeah, which if you do that spreadsheet tracking, which can be overwhelming, that helps make those things easier. It also is helpful and I tell this to all my patients, that doctors love data. And if you have a record of your symptoms and what you've been eating, not that you're going to go through every bit of the food journal, but you can at least, it's easier for you in the appointment to recall the symptoms that you've been having. And then you can look and say, oh, you have been eating, tons of fruits and vegetables. And it's helpful to know, what the pattern of food is rather than that one event, what happened there. So if you see the overall picture, it makes it a lot easier.
I agree that the pattern is helpful.
Yes.
We often can't make it through a 3 or 4 entries per day journal, but the patterns are, I think the patterns often seem to help the patients. They often will come and say, this is what I've noticed. And I find that can be really empowering for them.
Definitely. And we've even gone through and highlighted, we'll just highlight the bloating days and we'll be like, let's see what those days have in common and kind of zoom out and then zoom back in, but kind of trying not to get overwhelmed in the details too.
Yeah.
But the key, is so important that before we just start taking everything out of our diet, and it's important to make sure that we're not over restricting. That's something that I see over and over and over. And, knowing that, why did this reaction happen? And is it necessary that I take this particular snack or this food out? Because, my job is to help expand the diet.
Right.
Put things back. I mean, I've got people that forgot about fruits and vegetables. They're like, oh my God, yeah, I can't have all of that, and focusing on and I've asked people to try to change that mindset how are we framing this? What are the things that I can eat? I can have all of these vegetables. I can have all of these fruits. You can mostly have grains, nuts and seeds, but what are the foods that I can have rather than focusing on the foods that I cannot have? Easier said than done, but it is, kind of using that in the back of your head of how can I approach this psychologically as well as when I walk into the grocery store? Hit up that produce section.
Right.
And this looks fun. Here's a kiwi. Here's a dragon fruit, have these strawberries, these raspberries. Go to the farmer's market. The farmer's market is a lovely place. You get to meet the guys that are growing the stuff and, they're nice. They're glad you're there.
Yeah.
So, and then you can think up fun recipes that involve all of those fun foods. And, think about, you do have to kind of step out a little bit. It's going to probably not be what it always has been. And the change, I think, is hard, but it's exploring new foods, new ways of cooking, new places to shop. And that can be fun.
I think that's a great note to end on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Julie, thank you for your time today.
You're
we appreciate
welcome.
this.
Yeah.